Hey gang, and welcome Campfire crew, coming at you with volume 31 of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you like these tales of terror this time around, and if you've got one you'd like to share, send it on over to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. Special announcement coming up at the end of this volume, so I hope you stick around for that, and leave us not be hasty. Let's get it on. A Creepy Remodel by Line Noise. I'm not a believer in ghosts or anything like that. I'm pretty skeptical to the whole thing, but this is my story. Sorry for the Tolstoy. My first summer after high school, I worked for my neighbor. He had a contracting business that mainly did light remodels on houses, painting, general carpentry, basic landscaping, building decks, stuff like that. The usual crew was this guy, his partner, myself, and one or two of my friends, and a general laborer or two, depending on the size of the job. About halfway through the summer, we got a job to do some cleanup on a house a few towns over, which had been neglected for quite some time. Repaint inside and out, fix some squeaky floors and water damage, clean up the yard, etc. It was a decent-sized house, and needed a ton of work, and the estimate was that it would take about a month to do it right. The homeowners had no problem, as they were not living there and were planning on selling the place. Everything inside had already been cleared out for the most part. The first few days were spent just clearing brush and stuff out of the yards, so we could get equipment in to work on the exterior. Once that was done, we split off into two crews, one scraping the outside of the house and one doing work on the inside. It was the summer and the place didn't have AC, so the easier job was the work outside, and we would rotate who was in and who was out. To give you an idea of the layout of the house, when you walked in the front door, you had a large room off to your immediate right and left. Straight ahead of you and to your left, you had a staircase that went up to the second floor. To the right, a small bathroom, and then straight back to the kitchen and another large room. Upstairs, you had 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and there was only one staircase to the second floor. We started in the front rooms, and within an hour or so, our radio started acting up. It was an older boombox type thing, with a manual cassette player and the knob with the slide for tuning stations. In other words, it was all mechanical, not digital. At least 3 times the station changed on its own from 102.7, which we were listening to other random stations. Sorry, no creepy oldies music or anything. What is interesting is when it changed stations, the station it would end up on would be perfectly tuned in, and the jump between stations was very quick. Much quicker than a person could turn the knob and tune in the station so well, and then get away from the radio without being noticed. Like seconds time, just enough time for the slide to traverse the distance to the other station. And no, the radio didn't have the mechanical station presets. At least twice when this happened, I was in the room, and while my back was turned to it, the radio was in a location where it would have been damn near impossible for someone to get to it, turn the station, and then get out of there. It was not by a window either. On a few occasions, the volume would go way up beyond a point that I thought this thing was capable of producing. We then moved the radio to a different room, blaming it on bad power, and the problems let up. Other strange things. The lights would go on and off while you were working, including our own portable floodlights. It wasn't that the power was cut or anything, but the actual switch was thrown. You could also hear footsteps above you when you were sure nobody was upstairs. The final kicker, as we were wrapping up work in the place, I was replacing some molding in a second-floor bedroom. I had a large, heavy steel toolbox with a bunch of tools in it that must have weighed 30 or 40 pounds. One of those big craftsman jobs. I had finished off most of what I was doing and had most of my stuff put away when our lunch showed up. It was raining outside, so we were all sitting in the main entranceway by the stairs. In fact, myself and another guy were sitting on the stairs. Everyone was accounted for. And by this point, we were always joking around how we were working in a haunted house due to all the strange stuff that was going on, but no one was taking it seriously. Everyone was pretty much convinced that it was the combination of an old house, our imagination, and probably a few of us screwing around with each other, causing the stuff. Mid-conversation about this, there was a giant crash from upstairs. One of the dudes freaked and just ran for the door. Me and the dude sitting on the stairs turned and went up the stairs. At the top, you had a clear view of the entranceway to all of the rooms, so in the 3 seconds it took for us to climb them, nobody would be able to get out of a room without being spotted. Inside the room I had been working, my heavy metal toolbox had been tossed across the room and its contents scattered. The time from when it happened to when I got there was so short the stuff was still rolling around, and again, this was a 30 to 40 pound toolbox which was sitting on the floor and had been clearly tossed a good 10 feet. We checked the other rooms, and of course, found nothing. To go out the window, which was closed as it was raining, would have been a 15-foot drop into some nasty bushes. No ladders were up on the house, or even off the truck for that matter that day, due to the rain. Everyone working there was sitting with us while we ate, and nobody could have gotten past us and down the stairs while we checked the rooms, as there were people watching the stairs. It was pretty damn scary. And the final couple of days of us working there, everyone was really on edge. Nobody would go into rooms alone, and you could tell everyone was pretty much scared shitless. The boss mentioned the goings-on to the homeowner, who was just kind of like, whatever. A few years later, the place burned to the ground, and one of the guys I worked with that summer, who now lived in the town, sent me a story from the local paper. It turns out that the previous owner who lived there was a shut-in type person after his wife died a decade or so prior. He didn't ever really come out to do much, and that explained the neglect. He had died about a year prior to us working on the house, but nobody found his body for 6 months. The people who would hire us were his estranged son's family, who had inherited the house and were trying to sell it. The house had changed hands a couple of times in the several years after we had worked on it, nobody ever staying very long, and it was growing a haunted legend in the town. In the interest of brevity, I left out some of the smaller parts of the story that were strange, or could have been explained away easier. But suffice to say, some weird stuff was going on while we were there. I'm not one that really believes in ghosts or anything, but I have no way of explaining some of the stuff that happened there in any rational way. Thinking about it still gives me chills. Nobody was aware of the story behind the house when we were working there, and you could tell after the toolbox incident, everyone was truly on edge. Emily, by Firefly Waterfall. I'm a 17-year-old boy, and I have a stalker. I really need to talk to someone about this, and this is the best place to share your creepy stories. I don't know what to do. It all started a few months ago when an odd Instagram account started following me. It liked all my pictures and even commented on the oldest ones. The account had no pics or followers, and the bio only said, Emily. I thought that was an odd post or something and ignored it. A couple of weeks ago, my good friend, let's call him Jamie, created a WhatsApp group chat that you can join by a link. It was for a big party he was throwing. I scrolled through the names of the group and I knew most of them, and there were some new names, and one of them was Emily. Emily was quiet on the chat and only commented on my messages, usually with laughing emojis. The party was thrown last Friday at Jamie's, and I was the first one to arrive, and me and Jamie got wasted before everyone else arrived. Soon the place was full of other people, and I noticed a black-haired goth girl staring at me from the other corner of the room. My friend told me that her name was Emily, and that she had a little thing for me. She had been stalking me for months now, and I hoped she would just stop staring and go away since I have a boyfriend. I had no red flags since I only thought she was a silly bit obsessed teenage girl. I drank some more, and soon I couldn't walk. Jamie took me to rest in his bedroom, and I fell asleep. I woke up after a couple of hours, and I checked my phone, and it was about 3 a.m. now. I had a new text message from Emily. It was a picture of me, sleeping. The text said, I've been wondering what it feels like to pet you. I got really creeped out. I had to find Jamie, but first I had to take a piss. I went to the bathroom, and after I was finished and I was washing my hands, the shower curtain moved. I moved it to the side and saw a naked Emily. I was trying to leave, but she started kissing me and didn't let go. I tried to push her away, and she just kept kissing me and saying, Fuck me, please. You can do anything you want to me. I love you. I pushed her away and ran out of the bathroom and ran straight to Jamie's arms. I told him what had happened, but he just found it funny. He went to speak with Emily while I waited in the kitchen, and Emily told him that I tried to rape her. Jamie knows me better than that. He told her to cut the bullshit, put some clothes on, and get out. Then my boyfriend came to get me to sleep at his place. I checked my phone again in the morning, and there were more texts from Emily. I'm sorry that I love you. We belong together. You don't understand, and I cut myself because you love him more than me. And then a picture of her bloody hand and a knife. I moved to my boyfriend's house with my cat, and I'm staying here for the next few weeks. He's a strong guy with a big dog, so I felt pretty safe at this. Last Wednesday, Emily came to my school and started to apologize to me. I have no idea how she found out what school I was in. I told her we're cool, but she can't act like that, and she needs to leave me alone or I'll inform the police. She said that she would leave me alone, and, well, surprise, surprise, she didn't. After school, I went straight back to my boyfriend's apartment. He was still working, so I was home alone with the pets. I watched TV for about 30 minutes, with the dog on my lap and the cat on my shoulders, until I heard a knock at the door. We all went to answer the door, and it was Emily. I slammed the door on her without asking what she wanted and called my boyfriend. He said he would be there in 20 minutes. My boyfriend lives on the first floor, and soon his dog started growling and barking at the window. Emily stood outside our fucking window staring at me calmly. I went closer to close the blinds. When I did that, she started banging on the window, and the dog started barking like crazy. I suffer from depression and anxiety, so I started having a panic attack and sat on the floor shaking. After about 5 minutes of screaming and banging, it went quiet. I couldn't dare to move as the dog was still growling. Soon I heard the front door open, and the dog ran there shaking his tail. Thank God it was my boyfriend. He ran straight to me and hugged me. And then he called the cops, and they came to take a report and said they would speak to Emily. Then they left. I've heard nothing since from the police nor Emily. I thought I saw her standing outside the house yesterday morning, but I can't be sure. I'm scared and a bit paranoid of her now. I really hope this is over. It was a bad idea. Submitted by Coral Princess. This past summer, my friend Jessica came over to my house to spend the weekend. We grew up together, but we were now attending different high schools, and I was going to the local public school, but her parents wanted her to go to a private school as she had gotten into some trouble our freshman year. Jess was not a bad person at all. She just made some bad choices with some people one summer. Even she agreed the move was good for her. She was really smart, and my high school was lacking in that department, although I do like it. This happened in Florida outside of a town called Coral Springs. We were in the summer before our senior year, and we wanted to make the most of our time together as we could. My dad was away on some business trip, and my mom was going back and forth about leaving us home alone. She had been invited to a get-together at my aunt's house a few towns over. I kept telling her we would be fine, but it took her a while to finally smile and just let us stay home. No boys, she said, is her only rule, and asked us what we wanted for dinner. We both wanted sushi, so my mom called our favorite place and went out and got it. Jess and I talked about what we were going to do that night and the rest of the weekend, and we planned on just calling some guys we liked that evening, but not having them over. Jessica said there was a school that did dances and stuff with her school, and she said I'd really like this one boy named Josh. Mom came back with our food, we ate, and then she left, making sure we'd be okay. It was only about 7, so we were sitting out by my pool, and Jessica called this guy named Bob, and they were chatting away, and I was playing on my phone waiting until we were going to call Josh. A little bit later, Jessica asked me if I'd ever heard of Live Me. I hadn't, and basically it's a video chat app on your phone, and you can live video with people. You can see who's near you and connect with them, and she said we should do it with Bob and Josh, as Josh was going over to Bob's that night. I thought, what the heck, and found it in the App Store and downloaded it. I wasn't totally truthful on the registration, and I rarely use my real name for anything like that online, but we were going to let the guys know what account to look for and vice versa. I used my neighbor's address instead of mine. We were giggling about funny stuff we could do, and I went and got some crazy wigs my mom and aunt had used for a Halloween party. They were these blue Egyptian-type wigs with long blue hair. On my way back, I thought of something wicked and grabbed 2 plastic cups and snuck some wine out of the box in the refrigerator. I had only had wine once before, but I thought maybe that it would make the night more fun. That was the first dumb thing we did that night. Jessica didn't even question me when I handed her a cup. She had been messing with my phone and said the guys were setting up an account too after she had texted them. So, it was finally getting dark and we were out on the lanai with our festive lights on, sipping the wine and thinking we were so cool. Jessica knew more about Live Me, obviously, so she took charge and was going to video me dancing around with the wig to surprise the guys. Right away, I was surprised at how many profiles were around my city. I mean, there were dozens of people using this app, males and females. I asked Jess if other people could see us and where we were and everything, and she said yes, but she'd never had a problem with it before. The guys found us, and I started goofing around, and they were laughing and commenting on my dancing and hair. I took the phone and started to interview Jess, and then put her on the spot about Bob and asked if she liked him. She screamed and tried to get the phone from me. I ran away and looked down at the phone and saw a comment that wasn't from the guys. It had a bunch of characters for a name, and it just said, "Love it when girls scream." I stopped running around the lanai and showed Jess that message. She responded with, "Go away, we're not talking to you." Jess then called the guys on my house phone, and she told them about the message. Josh started doing a broadcast while those two talked, and I was laughing at him goofing off. I did another one with one of the filters to make myself look like a chipmunk, and again, got a message from that same account. "I like little furry things. Are you furry down there?" I turned my phone off, told Jessica about it, and she hung up on Bob. "Oh, we need to report that and block that guy," she said. So that's what we did, and I had more wine and was getting a little lightheaded at this point. The guys called back, and Josh asked me to video again, and at this point I knew it was a bad idea, but I did another one anyway. This time another message came up and it said, "Don't you block me, you little bitch. I know where you live." I just about screamed and showed Jess again. She told the guys and we said we'd call them later. We again blocked this person and reported it. Third dumb move, we had more wine telling each other it would calm us down. Then I got a text on my phone. It said, "Where did you go?" I wrote back asking who it was, and after a minute a reply came back. "It's me." "Who is me?" I asked. "I want to lick your little chipmunk," was the reply. I felt sick and quickly blocked the number after showing Jess and telling her that she was a jerk for convincing me to do this stupid Live Me thing. I wanted to call my mom, but we were a little buzzy and I didn't want her to find out about that. So we just locked the doors and went inside and watched some TV to calm down. A little while later my phone rang and it was an unknown number. I didn't answer it, but a voicemail was left, so I played it on speaker. "Hey, little chipmunk. I'm coming over. Can't wait to see you. Ever been fucked so hard you've cried, chipmunk? I'm coming over. See you soon." It was this really creepy, deep voice, and I went pale. "We need to call someone," I said. "Who?" said Jess. I tried calling my mom, but it rang and rang and rang and then just went to voicemail. "Let's just let it go," said Jess. "It's probably someone just screwing around." After a bit, we settled down and started watching a movie. But at one point, I looked out my front window and saw a black minivan driving slowly by my house. It went under a street lamp, but I couldn't see inside it, and it was driving slowly, like someone was looking for an address. I got up and it drove away, but even as I stood there, it came back, still driving slowly. It stopped in front of my house, but then pulled across to the other side of the street, and a pizza delivery guy got out and took a pizza to my neighbor's house. I almost had a heart attack. Then my phone went off again, another unknown number. Jessica had joined me at the window, and I told her about the van and how I was freaking out. The wine had worn off by this time, but now I was just scared, and she could not get me to relax. My phone rang again, and Jess picked it up and said, "Leave us alone, you fucking freak!" There was silence, and then I heard a voice say loudly, "I'm here, Chipmunk. Where are you?" It was then that I realized I could hear the voice, but not through the phone. I looked out the window, and there was a guy standing in front of my next-door neighbor's house talking on a cell phone. Thank God the lights in my house were off, and I grabbed Jess and pointed out the window. She saw him in the shadows, too. He was short, had a beard, and was wearing a green military-type jacket, despite it being in the middle of summer in Florida. "You'd better leave," said Jess. "We already called the cops, and they're on their way." "You don't sound like my furry little chipmunk. Are you a furry little pussy? Hey, we can all play." I grabbed the phone from Jess, hung up, and dialed 911. I told the person on the line everything that was going on and where we were, but by the time they got there, the guy was long gone. The police asked us a lot of questions, and 2 cars drove around and around my neighborhood, but there was no sign of this guy. My mom came home just as they were leaving, and they talked to her, and we told her everything too. She was glad we were safe, but said we should have called her, and no amount of telling her that we tried was convincing her. She immediately made me get rid of the app, and that was about the only time she was pretty pissed off, and telling me how stupid we were for using something like that. I never got another call or contact from that weirdo again, and I've promised myself to never, ever use video chat again. Creepy Hotel Phone Call by Summerchild11. I work the 3 to 11 shift at a seasonally driven hotel. In the off-season, which is October to May, we go from 2 people at the front desk each shift to just 1 person. I'm the supervisor, so I get stuck alone a lot. Last February-ish, on a Monday around 10 p.m., the phone rang, and I answered with my usual hotel spiel. "Thank you for calling. How can I help you?" On the other end of the line was an Asian guy whose English was awful. He paused for a second before asking me something in Chinese or Korean or Japanese. "I'm sorry, sir, I only speak English. I can transfer you to reservations. They have translators." Click. The dude hung up on me. Now my shift ends in an hour, and I have a system down where I do all of my closing reports, count my bank, all that stuff to get ready to just get out of there. In the middle of counting my bank, the phone rang again. "Thank you for calling. How can I help you?" It was the same Asian guy. At this point I was a little annoyed, and I transferred him straight to reservations so they could find someone who understood what he wanted. Not 5 seconds after I transferred him, the phone rang again. It was the damn Asian guy, only this time in very broken English, he asks to talk to Cho. "I don't have a Cho who works here," I said. "Is he a guest with us?" The Asian guy is talking very fast to someone in the background when a younger guy gets on the phone. "I'm very sorry to bother you, but my father is confused. Who am I speaking to?" I'm getting more annoyed by the second. Is it time for me to go yet? "This is the name of our hotel. Who are you guys trying to reach?" I said. The son doesn't say anything for a second, and then I hear him speaking to his dad in the background. After a few seconds of loud, what sounds like arguing, the son comes back, apologizes for bothering me, and hangs up. Phone rings again. It's the son. "Look, ma'am, I'm really sorry, but I'm not trying to call you. We've been trying to call my dad's best friend Cho all night. He's had the same number for years, and we have never had a problem. Only the past couple of times it reroutes us to you." I tell him what our phone number is, and he tells me the number he's trying to dial. I recognize it as a cell phone number from my state, but it shouldn't reroute to my hotel. I get the son's number, tell him I'll try dialing Cho's number, and I'll let him know. So I dial up Mr. Cho, and instead of going to voicemail, it takes me to my hotel's extension options, where if you hit 0, you'll ring the front desk. Okay, this is getting weird. I call the kid back and tell him my findings. The Asian family is in a panic when the son tells me the reason why they need to get a hold of Cho. Ma'am, I don't mean to freak you out, but Cho was fired from his job yesterday and he's been acting very strange ever since. This morning he texted my dad basically a suicide note, thanking him for being such a good friend and asking him to look out for his wife and daughter and that he hopes they will meet again one day. Cho hasn't answered my calls since then. We talked to his daughter a few hours ago and she says she hasn't been home all day, and their handgun and rifle are both missing. Is there any way you can look up to see if he's staying there, or maybe you know something? At this point, I'm freaking out. It's dead quiet in the hotel. I have maybe 10 rooms in-house. It's just me and a Mexican housekeeper there, and I know for a fact that we haven't had any Asian gentleman check in with us in over a week. I checked in almost everyone who came in that day, and I know there is no Mr. Cho at my hotel. I apologized profusely and explained that we have no Asian guests, and the best thing to do would be to contact his local police and report a missing person, and maybe call my town's police and report it to them too. I tell him if I find anything out, I'll call him. They thank me and we disconnect. It's 10:45 and it's creepy at the hotel now. Is it possible someone checked in for him, and are the housekeepers going to walk into a dead Asian guy in the morning? The overnight guy comes in and I don't tell him anything. He's already paranoid and weird to begin with, and telling him would just make things worse. I went home and dreamed about suicidal Asian guys. Fast forward 3 days, and a body of an unidentified Asian man is found in the bay about 2 blocks from my hotel. He had a gunshot wound in his head, and later that day he was identified by a family friend as Mr. Cho. Maybe not scary or supernatural, but definitely the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. The Thing on the Side of the Road by Julie E. I was about 6 years old when this happened, but my recollection of what I'm about to write is crystal clear. It doesn't have the same fuzzy, uncertain quality that childhood memories sometimes have. I know for a fact that I didn't dream it, and I will never forget the thing that I saw. My father and I were driving in his pickup truck at dusk. We were on a major road in Philadelphia, Ridge Avenue for those familiar with the area. One of my dad's friends had called him for help, and the guy was stranded on the side of the road with a dead battery. We were heading to the rescue with a set of jumper cables. My dad spotted his friend's car down a side street and pulled his truck over. Dense woods stretched out to the right side of the road, and the bright orange street lamps that had just flickered on cast a sickly hue over everything. My dad instructed me sternly to wait in the car. We were in a sketchy area of town and he was playing it safe. He grabbed the jumper cables, got out of the truck, and got to work. Several minutes went by in what seemed like slow motion. I don't know how long it actually was, but it felt like an eternity, and I was starting to feel nervous in the truck by myself. The sky was growing darker by the minute, and I was starting to wonder what was happening out there that was taking so long. I knew my dad had told me to stay put, but I felt compelled to get out. I had to get out of the truck and see my dad, just to reassure myself that he was still there and that everything was okay. I opened the door and got out. I peered around the raised hood of the truck and looked for my dad. A friend's car and my dad's Toyota were still connected by the jumper cables, and the jump had been successful. Both engines were roaring. But nobody was there. My heart began to pound. Where was my dad? Why wasn't he here? I stumbled around to the rear of the truck to see if he had gone back there for any reason. Nothing. Nobody. I was alone and growing more frightened by the second. My dad's Toyota was enormous compared to my 6-year-old body, and I couldn't see over the bed of the truck, and I couldn't see what was around the corner as I turned around to continue looking. I cleared it, was facing the woods, and then I stopped dead in my tracks. I saw something. Something horrible, something incomprehensible. I was standing about 4 feet away from what I can only describe as the thorax of an enormous insect. The orange streetlights were reflected in its awful, shiny carapace. It glistened with some kind of moisture, almost like sweat. And when I say this was an enormous insect, I mean this thing was roughly the same size I was. It had 2 impossibly long striated rear legs, and it had a set of spindly, unnatural front legs that reminded me of a praying mantis. And it was moving. I was frozen in place, unable to move a muscle. I had forgotten all about my dad. It was only me and this unholy thing that was moving, slowly, laboriously, into the overgrown brush that bordered the woods. Then, without warning, it stopped. It knew I was there. It slowly turned its triangular head, a head I hadn't even seen until this point. It had two enormous black bug eyes that I had seen before but could never make out its head. Once again, I could see the reflection of the streetlights in those eyes, and it made them look like they were burning as they watched me. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, I couldn't run. I knew everything was futile. Then, in an instant, it turned away from me and darted into the blackness of the woods. My dad's voice broke the trance I was in. He was furious that I'd gotten out of the truck and ordered me back in immediately, and I'd never moved faster. I never told him what I saw. In fact, I've never told anyone what I saw until now. But I know it was real. You Can Run, But You Can't Hide. Submitted by JFY. This story takes place in the year 1993. I was a sophomore in high school. I must emphasize the importance of the year, as cell phones, internet, and effortless forms of mass communication at your fingertips was non-existent. There are ample amounts of backstory, but mainly I cannot get into it and feel this story is the only one I can safely tell. You'll understand why as the story goes on. At this time in my life, my friends and I were very carelessly using a Ouija board that I found in my deceased great-uncle's attic after he passed. Again, I will not go into many details here, other than it was wooden, old, and had no instructions. We took it home, and my sisters and I, along with my friends, began to play with it, and weeks went by. A few months went by, and lots of shit was happening in my house and with my friends. Me, strongly being a believer in the paranormal, didn't question much of what was happening, as it was witnessed not just by me, but many others. I saw such occurrences change the beliefs of staunch skeptics in a matter of moments. I was terrified most of the time, sleeping with my lights on always, or never alone. At times I was even amused by it. We'll use the term it here, as I cannot and will not call it by its name. Then came a day in early spring of 1993. My friends and I were sitting at a round table in the library of our high school. The topic of conversation always seemed to circle back around to what was happening at my house. There were 4 of us sitting at the table: myself, Monica, Kim, and Suzanne. I was beginning to get a little agitated and began to feel arrogant. So arrogant that I said aloud to my friends almost these exact words: "If you're so powerful and so real, then you wouldn't be stuck in my house. So show us a sign you can hear us beyond there on that board." Just like that, the lights went out in the entire library and school for about 5 seconds. When they came back on, I continued my overconfident banter by laughing and saying aloud, "Really? That's all you have?" The bell rang shortly after, and it was time to go home. I didn't think much of the incident after, but knew my egotistical fake act may have some consequences down the line. That night when I fell asleep, I had a dream, and I'm not even sure I can call it that. I can't even call it a nightmare because the word connotates fiction to me. This was one of those dreams or visions, if you may, that you wake from and feel it. You can recite every line in detail as if you are still in it. To this day, I can still feel the resonation and remember every bit. The dream starts off in the morning as I begin to walk into school from the street. I am immediately plagued with a sense of terror and a sense that I was slowly being chased. There was a procession of black hooded figures, fully cloaked, no signs of human life underneath, just a human form. There were 6 of them, all with their heads down. It was broad daylight, and they were each carrying a torch. In the middle of them was a very tall figure, again all in black with a red stripe in front of his cloak. He was not carrying a torch, but rather a long, pewter staff of some sort. This is when I stopped studying the details of who this was. I knew who it was, and I knew they were after me, especially him. They were not running or in any type of haste. The procession was slow and methodical. I ran in the school fast and frantically began to look for a hiding spot in the library, as that's where my dream put me. I quickly jumped over these bookshelves, which were low to the ground, both in dream world and in real world, and I balled up on a shelf, hiding and praying not to be found. Then I woke up, breathless. I said few words as I got ready for school and onto the bus that morning. None of my friends involved in the library situation or the Ouija shit in general were on the same bus route, and I dared not speak a word of it to the kids I rode the bus with, as most of them I despised. When I arrived at school, finding my friends Monica and Kim waiting for me at the north entrance, as they did every morning, I began to tell them the details of the dream. We had just entered the main hallway as I was finishing the dream details, when running from the south entrance, which was a pretty good distance from us, was Suzanne. I do not feel I need to drive home the point that there were no cell phones and no conceivable way of Suzanne getting any of this info. And this is exactly as it happened and is 100% accurate. Trying as hard as she could to catch her breath, she looked at me and said, "I have a message for you from him." She didn't say it, I'm emphasizing that. "Tell Nicole she can run, but she can't hide." To this day, every time I tell this story, I envision him still laughing and saying, "I found you." More Than One Visitor, submitted by Anonymous. I've asked to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, as you will shortly see why. First off, I want to say that I was not a believer in anything paranormal or out of this world for most of my life. I put zero stock in ghosts, monsters, and that sort of thing. I think it's all stuff generated in the minds of people who are either misinterpreting what they're experiencing or manufacturing hallucinations they're not even aware of. I believe they are seeing something fantastic, but in my book, that doesn't make it that way. What about extraterrestrial life? I'm not sure about that either, but I do firmly believe there are things in our skies and space around Earth that are not fully explainable by the general citizenry. After my experience in 2002, I am certain that our military and government are experimenting with aircraft not revealed to the general public, and perhaps they are communicating with other life forms. Of that I can't be sure. But what I can be sure of is what I saw and what happened shortly after my sighting. This was late summer 2002, and I was in my backyard near a lake that I'm going to keep nameless. But I will say my home is in rural Iowa near the Minnesota border. My wife and I were preparing to have some friends over for a bonfire, so I was out getting things ready with the wood and chairs around our fire ring. I live on the edge of the lake, and the pit is literally feet away from our small dock that juts out into the water. I heard a strange humming sound and stopped what I was doing, thinking maybe it was a helicopter coming my way from a distance, but it stopped after a few seconds. And then I thought maybe it was my neighbor's son playing his electric guitar. The kid was a great musician and in a band and often played very loudly. We didn't mind at all, as he was really good and it was nice to hear. I figured maybe he had a new amp and it was cranked up so high that I could hear the hum. His parents were part of the group coming over, so I figured I'd ask later. My wife came out with snacks to put on our picnic table next to some coolers of wine and beer for our little party. 2 other couples were coming to relax on this Friday night, then I was excited to be off the following week before starting to get ready for the upcoming school year. I was a teacher back then, but that's neither here nor there. When my wife went back inside, I heard the humming again and waited for the first notes of guitar, but they never came and the sound went away. Soon our friends arrived, and my neighbors walked across the grass between our homes, and we were all talking and laughing off the bat. At this point, 2 couples, me included, we were in our mid-20s and my neighbors were in their late 40s. We had all gotten along very, very well. Richard, my neighbor, said we should throw some horseshoes in my pit, so the guys wandered away from the women, and I asked him about the humming. He said he hadn't heard it, and his son wasn't at home. I shrugged it off, and we played shoes with my friend I'll call Don, and he played the winner. As it started getting darker, I left the guys, grabbed a beer, and got messing with the fire. Soon it was roaring, and everyone was back at the table getting another drink and snacking on chips and pretzels. We all sat in chairs around the fire and just chatted away about all kinds of things, jobs, kids, and so on. My wife and I were expecting, and Don had a 1-year-old that was with his mom that night. It was a very enjoyable evening, and eventually the women started talking about something my wife wanted to show them in the house. Some scrapbooking thing or whatever. The ladies went inside and we all sat around talking about college football and how the local schools would do that season. It was about 10:30 when the humming came back. I asked the guys if they heard it, and they all stopped talking and listened. Don said, "Yeah, no shit, there it is." After a bit, Richard heard it too, and we all talked about what it could be. It went away, and then we heard the women laughing through the open window of my house. Richard got up for more beers and the night rolled on. I looked down at my watch, and it was now midnight. Don had just told a funny story about his kid peeing on him, and we were all laughing, and then he stopped. It was dead quiet. Other than the fire crackling, there were no night sounds. No crickets, no birds, not a thing. We all just sat there, and Richard looked up and said, "Mother of God." The sky above us was black. Pure black, not a cloud or star in the sky. After a minute, I looked to the east and saw stars over there, and then out to the west and more stars. There was something hovering right above us. None of us could talk. We wouldn't have known what to say at all. And then whatever it was started to move to the south, but right before that, a bluish beam shot down across the lake on a little island near our neighbor Agnes's house. As the thing slowly moved away, we could see it was a massive triangular-shaped craft, for lack of a better word. It didn't have any lights we saw right away, but as it moved away, we could see 3 large lights on each end of the triangle, and then 3 bright lights at the back of it. I guess they were the power engines or whatever that was making this thing go. But the craft was silent. We never heard it come near us, hang out overhead, and it made no sound as it glided away. The 3 of us just watched it go, and it was a while before anyone said anything. I got up, grabbed 3 beers, and said, "What the hell was that?" Suddenly, there was the humming sound again, and this time 4 helicopters came zooming over us in the direction of the strange craft that had moved out of our sight. They were super low, and the ladies came out after the noise and were asking what that was all about. We all looked at each other and gave the "don't say a word about this" to one another. We brushed it off and wrapped things up not much later. Before he went home with his wife, Richard said, "Hey, let's go over to the island tomorrow and check that out." We had a hushed conversation about what was going on, and neither of us wanted to say what we were thinking. That night I was awoken by sounds outside of my window. There were 4 men doing their best to be quiet, standing in my backyard at the edge of the lake. I sat listening for a moment, and then heard a radio crackle right outside my sliding glass door that led to the backyard. Through the curtains, I could make out the shape of a man wearing some sort of uniform, and he was holding a rifle. I'm not ashamed to say I was afraid to go outside, so I just went back to bed. In the morning, there was no sign of anyone ever having been there. I checked the morning paper to see if anyone else had made a report about anything they saw, but there was nothing. I mean, the town we lived in had maybe 3,000 people, but we did get newspapers from the larger towns in the area, and it had to have been seen by someone else. The craft was that large. I went outside with a coffee and saw Richard was also out in his yard. He came over and I said, "Let's take my rowboat over to the island before the wives woke up." At this point, it was about 6:45. We pushed my little aluminum boat into the water and made the short row over to the island and waved at Agnes, who was out in her yard with her dogs. This island isn't much of anything, just a group of trees and rocks, and it didn't take long for us to scramble all over it, and we didn't find much. But just as we were leaving, Richard pointed to the ground. There was this bubbling liquid, and it wasn't burning the grass it was on, it was just pooled there and bubbling. I remember saying it looked like mercury. I always double my paper coffee cups up, so I took one off and scooped some of the stuff up in it, and it kept bubbling, but it didn't melt the cup or anything like that. When we left, went over to Agnes. She was in her 70s, and she said hello. She right away asked about last night, and said something had made her dogs act all crazy. We knew what she was talking about, but we said we didn't know. We went back to my house, not saying much, and I was planning on taking some of this stuff to my friend at the local community college, where he was a science professor. Maybe he could tell us what it was. It was a normal weekend for the most part, but on Monday morning I called my professor friend and he said he'd stop by to get some of the stuff, and he did, and this is when things went really, really weird. At about 12:30 that afternoon, I had just finished lunch, and my wife went shopping. There was a knock at my door, and through the frosted glass I saw two shapes. I opened the door to two men in dark suits and sunglasses. In my driveway was an all-black pickup truck, and I'm talking all black. Black paint, black rims, black bumpers, blacked out windows, totally black. I said, "Hello, can I help you?" And they flashed some badges and IDs at me, but I didn't get to look at them long. They asked me if I saw anything unusual on Friday night, and I was honest and told them yeah. My friends and I saw this weird craft in the sky, and then some helicopters chasing it. They asked if I had told anyone else what we had seen, and I said no. One of the guys started to get pushy, and I asked them who the hell they were. I got the what I would find out would be standard, when we're here from the government, we're here to help nonsense. They kept questioning me, and then I started to feel lightheaded and angry. They asked if I had noticed anything strange around my yard, and I said no, which wasn't a lie. I was getting tired of these guys, and suddenly a belligerent guy said, "We know you picked something up off the ground. If you don't hand it over, we'll come back with a court order and tear your place apart." Now I wasn't scared. I was pissed off. I told him to eat a bag of shit and go ahead and get a warrant, but to get the hell off my property until then. I shut the door in their face, and they stood there for a little while, then went to their truck and pulled onto the road. Then they just sat there staring at the front of my house before driving off. I ran down to my basement and took the cup with some of the stuff in it and poured it into a plastic container with a lid and screwed that on. I went out to my little dock and slipped it underneath a plank with some duct tape on it to hide it. Then I went over to Richard's house and told him what had happened, and that we might be in trouble with someone. He looked at me wide-eyed but said nothing. For good measure, I called the local sheriff, whom I knew, and said he'd never heard of these guys, and to be wary of some kind of scam. My wife came home, and not long after she came home, there was another knock on the door. It was those guys again, but now there were 4 more and another truck, and plus my sheriff friend was with them too. One held up a piece of paper that looked legal, and all of them barged into my house. The sheriff came in and looked at me and raised his hands in a "I don't know what to say" gesture. I sat down in a chair with my preggo wife on my lap, who was crying and asking what was going on. For 2 hours, these guys tore through my house. They held up a pair of shorts and a polo shirt and asked if I had worn them on Friday. I said yes, and they slipped them into a bag. Then one guy came in from outside holding my coffee cup that once held the silver liquid, and he handed it to the belligerent guy. "Didn't pick anything up, huh?" he said behind his sunglasses. I told him, "Look, you got what you wanted, now get out of my house." The guy looked at me one more time and warned, "Leave this alone." He stared at me for a long time, and then they all left. My wife was crying and asked me again what had happened, and I told her the whole thing more slowly. Not long after, Richard and his wife came over. They'd also had a visit, and they also took his clothes that he had worn on Friday night. 3 times being the charm, Don called. Same thing. I invited everyone over under the auspices of a hot dog dinner, and they agreed. We sat around my kitchen table with a couple of beers and told our wives again about what we had seen while they were in the house. Then Richard looked at me. "Hey, what about Jerry at the college?" I got up and called my buddy at home, but Jerry acted like he didn't know anything I was talking about. He said he didn't remember me seeing him, and that I never gave him a sample of anything. No matter how much I talked to him and said, "Jerry, cut the shit, you know what I gave you," he said, "Sorry, man, I can't help you, I don't have anything." I hung up and told everyone what he had said. So I let it go. A couple of days later, I went out and threw out the liquid I had saved and put the whole thing behind me. None of us ever told anyone else what we had gone through that night, and I don't think we ever will, except for me sharing this story. I'm not going to say we were visited by the men in black or whatever, but someone did come to my house and go through all my stuff right after I saw something strange in the sky and picked up something weird off the ground. Whoever those guys were, they don't have a reason to ever come back and visit me, and to be honest, I don't ever want to see them again. Who was that doctor? Submitted by Anonymous. My daughter's last vaccine visit with her pediatrician was an eye-opener. I noticed a different doctor was giving vaccines that day, and I was going over the record with him up to that point. He talked very little and then stopped and said, "Off the record, if that was my child, I would skip this round of vaccines." My eyes widened as I turned to meet his stare and said, "Excuse me? Why would I want to skip this round?" He reminded me that we were speaking off the record, and he said that he was not telling me to skip them, but if it were his child, he would. I did skip them, and later found out that there was a major problem with that vaccine lot. I called the doctor's office to pass on my thanks to the substitute that was giving the vaccines that day. I was floored when they informed me that a doctor by that name had never been in that office, and they had never had anyone to give vaccines other than the same regular nurse for the last 20 years. I asked them who the man was in their office that day, and they said they had no idea, but they would let me know. I never heard from them again. Who was that man? I don't know, but I've been eternally grateful that he was there. Creep on the Street by Eyeless Jessie. I was still in middle school at the time that this happened, so when I was about 13 or 14. As a note, I was rather tall for my age, and some people thought I was in high school, which will make sense later. My town was very quiet and nothing serious happened, and I guess that's why I was so freaked out in the end. I'd been walking down the street and occasionally stopping to look into windows of some stores, and I decided it was getting late, and I told my parents I would be home before dark. My parents were pretty laid back when it came to me going out on my own, as long as I was back by the time I promised I would come back. I made my way down the empty street, then I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced behind me slightly to see a man, and he looked to be in his late teens or early 20s. He soon sped up so he was walking next to me. "Hey, how are you?" he asked. And nothing seemed off about him, so I replied, "I'm good, just heading home." I tried to be friendly, but I didn't like talking to people, especially people I didn't know. He nodded. "What's your name?" I honestly didn't want to talk to him, and I sure as hell didn't want to give him my name. "Becky," I lied. I didn't look at him directly, but I kept him in the corner of my eye. I felt like I needed to know what he was doing, and I took in some of his features. He had shaggy, dirty blonde hair and brown eyes. And he was only about 3 or 4 inches taller than me, and at the time I was 5'7" and a half. He smiled, and that set me on edge. "Cool," he said. "Do you have a boyfriend?" I didn't know what to say at this point, but I had to answer. "Yes, I do," I lied, again hoping to make him lose interest, or at least get him to stop talking to me. "Want to come hang out with me and my friends?" he asked. "No thanks. I promised my parents I'd be back before dark." He kept walking with me in step and kept persisting that I come hang out with him. At this point I ignored him. My house was just 3 blocks away. He seemed to get annoyed by my lack of response and said, "Come on, it'll be fun." He grabbed my hand and tugged it. I honestly thought I was going to go psychotic. I hate being touched, and being touched by people that I don't know really sets me off. I yanked my hand from his grip and snapped, "Keep your fucking hands off me!" He got angry and reached for me again. "We're going to meet my friends now," he said, attempting to grab me. I turned and bolted down the street. I wasn't in the best of shape, so I doubted I would make it to my house. I could hear his heavy footfalls behind me and occasional shouts for me to stop running. I ran into a random shop and ran up to the cashier and told her what had happened, and she told me to hide behind the counter and then called the police and told them what happened. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. One officer stayed with me in the shop, and the other made a sweep of the area and found nothing. They drove me home, and my parents came outside with a surprised look on their face as I stepped out of the car. One of the officers got out and explained the situation, and my parents thanked him and we went inside. My parents didn't let me walk alone for months, and I didn't feel the urge to walk alone. I was shocked that this happened in such a quiet town, and so were the police. So, to the creep that chased me, go fuck yourself. Thanks for listening, gang. Hope you liked this volume. And if you did, please like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Follow me on social media. All of my links are in the description of this video. And if you feel like dropping me a tip, my tip jar at Patreon is available for that. The link is also down below. I've been getting emails and comments on past videos for another collaboration, and I'm happy to let you know that I am working with Mr. Davis to bring you some cool, scary stories shortly, so stick around for that. And as always, send me your scary stories. Email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.